I will write down the sentence or two. It makes sense, but then I write a paragraph, and then it kind of gets confusing. I kind of have the documents on Google Docs if you want to stare at it, but after a while, it's like I just don't convey the thought very well, or I miss articles. I'm always using not a readable, like if someone reads it, they will either quietly just say, oh, okay, this works, because they haven't actually sat down and read it. Like they just read highlights, and like you could skim through it and somewhat get a better idea than actually sitting down and being like, oh, this is wrong. What do you mean in this? And it gets confusing. It's junior year, I think, for high school, when you're 11th. Yeah, is that when you have Ruggiano as a teacher. Haha, she's gone now, so no worries about her. But she's one of the people that kind of knows the problem apparently, but was always just saying, just redo it. And that was kind of frustrating on my part. So I'm like, okay, this is my last year of English mandatory thing. I still need to do some English writing credit of some sort. So I thought college writing, and I don't need to do another year of, oh, this is English 101, or what would you call it, mandatory English class. and with that one, it's college writing, and you had to get a certain essay score, which was like 28, and I got like 29, like barely passing. Because I understand the principles, the logistics easily, because selecting the bubble and saying, oh, this is this article goes here, like or whatever the writing. This is what happens when you go out of school for 3 years. You just lose information. Then the worst thing you could usually do is that you would kind of just like, okay, I'll just quickly do the problem, and that like makes the problem way worse. And that's why it's writing disconnect. I start sounding like a 5-year-old when I am 18 years old, and my teacher's like, I don't get why you keep doing this. You talk intelligently in class, you don't really have problems with what we're saying or doing, you follow the lessons very well, but when you turn in an essay and I actually sit down and read it, it doesn't make sense for your personality, your intelligence, and what usually you convey. Like I could see remnants of like, if you were 5 years old, you would be like this, trying to do a quick hash job of a college writing class, which I thought, oh, okay, well, thanks, teacher. That helps. She's like, we're going to actually see if this is a problem by having you do an IQ test to actually deem if your supposed intelligence that seems to be there is actually there, which was lucky for me was there. And then she's like, okay, we get to just accommodate you, and just like when you do class assignments, you just get longer times to do it, and you just go over to a specialist with the writing disability and just be like, okay, make sure you do over the assignment. And primarily that worked. It helped when I was focusing on the assignment stuff. When I'm out of school right now, this is like, I completely space it, and then I have to sit down and be like, I am slowly typing this to make sure I don't do anything. So I tend to have short paragraphs with emails, and I try to make sure that I appear as informal, because formal writing does it very badly. And that does, and then that's the other thing too. It's like I rather talk to people than text people. That's another thing too, which makes me seem very out of place with my generation, because apparently all we do is text and call. Well, not call, but just text essentially. And I think that's probably more. It's probably more my generation be like, okay, I could easily text someone in 2 seconds more than I could call them up, say hello, get over the awkwardness of calling some person up actually, and then actually start talking about what we're doing or whatnot. Well, I'm to the point where it's like, oh, I could totally understand why calling people makes more sense. And it kind of creates that displacement of, oh, you're kind of out of the normal thought process that everyone else keeps having, which is a struggle. And that's why I'm kind of doing this interview to say, this is a problem, and you can't really ignore it, because you're going to get to a point where you're in the business of some sort. You're going to have to write something down, and you have to take 2 hours just to make sure nothing's really that bad when you're writing about maybe 1 page, and they expect maybe 20 pages. And then again, I haven't really took a serious college class. I did do a technicals college. That was always fun. And then I'm just talking because I'm like, I don't know, remember how to put this down. But the writing detachment, or writing disability, or whatever you want to call it, is dysgraphia, which essentially covers most of what I just said. Haha. When I completely forget what I was writing about 3 months ago, reread what I was doing, I'd be like, I don't get what was I writing here, because I completely forgot. My mind's not automatically like fixing it, which it doesn't help. But then it's like, I could say, oh, if you ever see JCP Gray on We Must Kill the Penny, because the penny is pointless. The penny is not actually saving anyone's economical sense of financial time, or actual give them opportunities to do anything beyond collect pennies in a jar that sits on your counter for maybe 20 years or so, just because that's how much pennies don't go into circulation. They just end up in jars or in trashes, which is a literal problem. And they cost more, which a penny is like 1.5 more cost to make than its actual worth, which is always, when I was writing, it was like the penny cost is 1.8 than its arbitrary worth. Or I use like complicated nouns to kind of convolute what I'm trying to say, when it's easy to say, oh, the pennies just costs 1.8. The hardest aspects are majority, you will sit down, do maybe an hour of writing, and then you proofread it for a second, and your mind at the time when you're not writing what I just wrote will just be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. You give it to someone else. Someone else reads it through it. They say okay, because they're just skim reading. They're just your friend. And then you give the paper to your English teacher. She'll read the first page and say, oh, this doesn't completely work. What are you doing? And then you're like, what do you mean? I have gone myself, someone else, and then you. How come you're the odd person now? Because she's actually sitting down reading the first paragraph to actually see what is going on in general. And then the frustrating thing, she won't read on until the end, because she's like, I don't want to keep reading on and go through this jibble-jabble, thinking without giving any more effort into what you put in, which is probably like 3 pages of writing that you put into censorship, or whatever the topic of the day that the English teacher wants you to do, which is probably the most difficult thing, because you sit down, rework all the work you did, and usually if you do this within the day, you don't really think, I need to sit down and slowly read this, because you're like, I think I had this true because the teacher just said nothing to help this, and that's because she just said, oh, a general one sentence of why it doesn't work, not saying down red marks everything across the board, which in itself is a frustration. Very frustrating, because it's like, I don't know what I'm fixing. Am I fixing this general construction context? Do I just rewrite stuff? And then that's why you kind of end up in this loop where eventually you keep submitting this paper that the teacher will just eventually give you a C-, which makes a passing grade, and you forget about the problem, and then you just have the paper on your Google Docs, and you're like, oh, let me reread this. Holy crap, I can see why she had issues with this. After what, maybe a month of forgetting about this project. Like, if it's not in your mind, you can see the problem. But if it's in your mind, it's totally making a problem. And then when you have friends, family, people who want to fix this with you, you just have to point out and say, you just got to slowly read this. Make sure I actually have sentence structures that you're correcting. Like, you have to spend more than a simple glance. You have to spend more time saying, okay, hold on, this doesn't make sense. Make sure you read with me to make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing at this moment. And at that point, if they're not seeing what you're seeing, then you have to ask them, say it out loud. Does it make sense? And if they start adding words into it, then you kind of have a warning signal there to say, hey, what's happening with this? You don't have that word there. And they will, if they're nice and patient with you, they will sit down and go, oh yeah, that I don't have that word there. I'll put it in and it'll fix the problem. And that will be the most helpful in actually doing the work. Now, if you're trying to say this isn't a problem they have all the time, well, the best thing to do would be just say, English teacher, can you submit an IQ test for this person? Because I think this has a person problem. And I could point out this entire essay he just handed to me, or she handed to me, or whoever this beloved person you have is gender associated with. That's a fun world. But and if you had the teacher I have, which was Dr. McFerrin for creative college writing, who she retired now, which is unhelpful, but she'd be like, yeah, we'll totally submit a date and appointment to have him tested for his IQ to see if he's making sense for what he's measured as, which I did it, and it helped greatly a lot to give you more time for the assignment, because as the thing is, the whole worst thing about this thing is that you don't have time. You just want to get the work done. You have maybe a week to do it. Usually a teacher will give you a month, but you seriously know that most kids will just do this in a week, because why focus on an essay for a month and rewrite it? That's not fun. And the teacher the teacher will be very pleasantly surprised if you do that, but that's the thing. It ruins your kind of ability to quickly spread out written material without expressing yourself clearly, and that's the worst thing about it. And you gotta help fix it. Be their friend. Tell them that, hey, I think this is a problem. It's a general conversation. It depends on who you're talking to, what this person's willing to do, and you just have to discuss with it, which is super vague and unhelpful. But like anything else, you gotta outline the problem-solving skills that you're like, okay, how we're solving this, and how is the results of the solving this coming out? And if it doesn't help, then you gotta just try another process, which is the whole point of life problems, is that you're solving the problem, not putting the blame on writing detachment, dysgraphia, or anything. You're just trying to build a structure that they could live off and could always have a reasonable time to fix this, which is what the goal is. And that's all you have to think about. General texts, like after a while, sometimes even doing a single sentence, you screw up, because if you're completely thinking about something else and will write down your sideways thought will completely appear as the tree in the deer, especially with autocorrect, is your worst enemy, because you are not sitting down and thinking, oh, I'm not spelling this correctly, let me think this out, and then you're like, okay, there we go. But with autocorrect, it will instantly just grab the nearest thing to be like, oh, this solves it. There you go. You have a proper word. You don't have proper grammar, but you have a proper word. So like the deer was in the tree lot, and you're like, what? And then you go and you're like, no, I'm in the car in the parking lot waiting for you. And then you're like, I have to sit down and think seriously. And then that's the point where I just call someone and say, briefly, 5 seconds. Okay, I'm in the car in the parking lot. Any questions? No, good. All right, I'm hanging up now. And because after a while, you just become very blunt in what you're doing, because you don't want to sit down and figure out how to write the stuff out. When it's like, I could call this person up in 6 seconds and tell them what's going on faster than I could write this out. The paper will, like, this one I probably spend maybe 15 minutes on it. Even then, I don't even know. It's like, the demand reforms but not reform that hinders the process but improve itself on other systems around it, which is complete nonsense when you literally destruct that sentence. But you end up with kind of phrases like that, where it's like, since the Europeans had this better sanitation system before we even start chemically cleaning out wastes and filling out our landfills, the on-body waste department, they successively fertilize their farms with human bio-waste. This is absolutely sensible. It's stuff like that where me saying it out loud without thinking about it, I'm skipping stuff that I have to say with the human bio-waste, and this is essentially a sensible thing to do. Or like, I don't give complete sentences, I don't give the articles or the on-bodily waste. Like, I have to fix the structure sentence to actually make sure the words I'm incorporating into the sentence is not becoming dribble drabble. Then let's see, I could pull up another one for fun. Like, censorship is the destructive forces of ideas and informed decisions, warfare, propaganda, and censoring decays both sides to the point of ruin final reasoning for the war, which was not without sentence or pause. Like, it completely, if someone was reading this, they'd be like, this is not how you write English. Censorship distorts everyone's view of history. But if I have one sentence, and it makes perfect sense, like once in a while it does it. In uniform culture, acceptance will rule in all sources of views morphs into an emotional bias and politically motivated one. Again, not a very proper structure sentence. It sounds like I have the idea. I don't have the structure sentence to actually convey it into words. Like, if I was typing out now, it's like, the censorship creates its own sense of culture that ruins its perspective growth and ruins the momentum of any societal gains or losses. It stagnates, which sounds a lot more better, and that's why you tend to speak with dysgraphia, with words more often, be more clever sounding out loud than actually sitting down, writing what you want to say on paper, because after a while you're like, I don't like this. And like anything, it just takes time and slowing down and trying to write it out. And reading the Wikipedia says, oh, this is usually associated with 10 other mental illnesses, or it's hard to diagnose because it's so vague. It's like writing detachment. Who actually hears about that? And that's the thing. It took pretty much, I was almost out of high school senior year that I was given this diagnosis, and I'm like, oh, well, that's helps me in this problem, but I've been having this problem since I was in probably first grade when I was being introduced to English, and not really thinking I need to actually sit down and have someone read through all my work to make sure everything works. And you think the teachers will generally do it, but then you think, oh, how many students per class? 30 students. How many papers have most of these students? Are 24, usually. 6 students will forget to do it on time or out of place. So after a while, you just skim it. You just read, and once in a while, you'll be like, okay, these sentences make sense, but they didn't sit down and wait a second. These are all mistakes. Because if you're an avid reader or you've just been reading English for super long, you just start fixing mistakes in people's work without thinking too much about it, which is poor example for a teacher when they're actually trying to do corrections. But like anything else, it's not like I have a computer editing me. I have a human. Humans are not that perfect, which is why we're talking about mental illnesses. Because we can't debug ourselves. We only could work at it. Yeah.